Hello, good evening, and welcome to this PCS live event. I'm PCS President Fran Heathcote, and joining me tonight will be Mark Serwotka. We're live on our Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube channels, and we'd urge you to hit the share button on all of those so we can make sure this reaches as many members as possible. And a recording will be available after this live event. Particularly warm welcome to our interpreter, Richard, who makes sure that all of our events are as accessible as possible. It's easy for me to say. And Richard, we're really glad that you could join us this evening. Okay, the way we intend to run tonight is that in a minute, I will hand over to Mark Serwotka. He'll take you through a little bit about where we are, where we've been, what we've been doing, and you know what we need to now consider, and we'll make sure there's plenty of time for questions and comments. Obviously, some of you have messaged in advance with your questions and comments, but also don't worry about sending those in to us using our admins and using the usual channels to make sure your questions get through. I will then try and get through as many of those as we can, but we intend to try and get done within the hour if at all possible. So without any further ado, it's probably just, you know, by way of opening remarks, easy for me to say that there's a lot going on at the moment. Clearly, the outline that the Cabinet Office have given us has meant that there are some real issues and decisions to be taken by groups, by branches, by members, by reps and activists. And we want to arm you with as much information as possible when you're consulting your members and when you're discussing together about where we're going with our campaigns. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mark, and Mark will take you through all of that. Over to you, Mark.
Well, thanks very much, Fran, and good evening to everybody, especially to Richard and to all those hundreds and hundreds of people who are already joining us across a variety of platforms. As you've explained, Fran, what I want to take 10 or 15 minutes to do is to set out for people very clearly what's happened, what we've been through, what we've claimed from the government, how far we've got in negotiations, and what decisions we now need to consider over the course of this month in terms of the way forward. I think the important thing to stress to everybody who's joining us tonight is we'll try and answer the questions that have been asked. We've put an FAQ out now on our website and on our platforms, but if anyone has any further questions after tonight, please raise them with your rep or email the union centrally, because we want to make sure that everybody has as many questions answered as they can, because that's a key for us to deciding the way forward. I think it's also important to say that, as I will explain tonight, the decision on where we go next will be taken in a month's time, having allowed for a big period of consultation in the union with members and reps, where we get a chance to consider where we've got to and where we want to be. And it will only be when we've made that decision in a month's time will the NEC consider whether or not we need to ballot all members of the union on the way forward or call further industrial action. So it's really important to stress that whatever people have heard, whatever rumours people have heard, or whatever your employer is telling you, we will make the final decisions where we go. We'll do that after a full discussion within the union at all levels. And I think that is the way that we can be sure that what we do will be the correct thing to ensure that we can take as many members as possible with us, and we ensure we get the best possible deal out to the government. So the first thing to say is to thank people who've joined us tonight, but also thank everyone who's been involved in this campaign from the get-go. We should remember that this campaign has been waged against the biggest cost of living crisis many of us will have ever lived through. It's been waged against a government who has singled out PCS members in the civil service and related public sector bodies for the worst treatment of anyone in our economy. And it's been waged against all the odds, where we have attempted to shift the government for the first time ever through national industrial action to deliver significant extra money to benefit PCS members, but also deal with our other concerns. So we should remind ourselves what we asked. We asked for a cost of living pay rise of 10% payable to all members. We asked for a minimum wage of £15 an hour. We've asked for our pension contributions to be reduced by 2% and for that to be backdated to April 2019. We've asked for a job security agreement from the government because of the fear that they will attempt to cut jobs, and that means people will be forced into compulsory redundancies. And we've asked for the government to give us a guarantee that they will not reduce our redundancy terms by the 33% that they want to reduce them by, which they've been trying to do since 2011, 2012. To all of those things, the government repeatedly has told us the answer is no. And to remind ourselves that what the government actually told us is we're getting 2% for 2022, 2023. We would get 2% for 2023, 2024. They would cut our redundancy terms because that's a manifesto commitment. They weren't prepared to give any further ground on job security. And they frankly will not even discuss the issue of pensions, that they say they are committed to keeping us paying the current rate of contributions. So despite all of our efforts, we found a government that was completely intransigent, and that's why we decided to consult members and to hold national ballots on an employer-by-employer basis to give us the ability to call strike action. And we should remember that the union had never before ever managed to get over 50% turnout as required by law in any form of national ballot. Well, as we sit here now, we have done that twice. We've not only done that, but we have taken the biggest amount of industrial action in the union's history. And I want to thank everyone who's contributed to that. So we've had 3 national strikes, one in February, one in March, and one in April. That in total meant there was over 300,000 strike days taken by PCS members in national strikes. The first 2 of them were taken with other unions. The third one was taken by ourselves in April. We have had targeted action in over 304 separate occasions. We should pay tribute to every member who has taken part in targeted action. Over 18,000 members have taken part. And if we remember, that goes right back to the early days in the Rural Payments Agency, in the Border Force over Christmas, and has gone right through the spring across countless employers, including most recently a 5-week strike in the passport offices. And even today, we have heroic women and men on strike in the DVLA in Swansea, and we're due to have further targeted action of our driving examining members starting on Thursday of this week. That is an unprecedented amount of strike action. It has meant that the union has paid out £6 million in strike pay, and we have raised half of that money in strike pay through the levy that members are paying in order to ensure that this campaign can be sustained. We have 10,000 more members of the union than we had this time last year, and we now have 7,785 activists. So the campaign that we have waged has been on a level we have never done before, and we should all recognise the contribution made in every workplace, in every branch, by activists, by members, and by staff. And I mention all of that action because it is that action and that action alone that has forced the government to make a second series of concessions since this dispute started. And the reason that I want to stress that point is we all know when we ballot for strike action, many people think the union can never win anything. Many people say, what's the point in balloting for strike action because we never get anywhere. And one of the things that we want all to reflect on tonight is whether or not what we've got is enough is one debate. But I hope what we can all agree is the government would have given us nothing had it not been for the campaign of industrial action that we have waged, and we should be immensely proud of that. Now, after the first ballot and the first wave of strike action, the government made its first concession, which was to increase the money available for 23-24 pay from the 2% they had previously told us to a pay remit of 4.5% to 5%. When that was done, we said it was good that the government had moved, but it was nowhere near enough. We're still being treated worse than any other member in the public sector, and therefore we decided to carry on. We had to have a second ballot, and in that second ballot, what the union said to members was that we felt that if we won that second ballot, we would see further concessions from the government. And I think what we should reflect tonight is that has been absolutely proven to be true. The money that the government's now put on the table has only happened because we won the second ballot for action, and they know that we're in a position to continue industrial action for another 6 months. In fact, the last Facebook Live we did and at all the meetings that Fran and I have addressed, we confidently predicted that if we won the ballot, the government would make concessions. The debate for us would be, are the concessions enough, or do we need to fight on? And that's the position that we've reached now, that we need to consider what's on the table, ask ourselves whether or not it's enough, ask ourselves if it's not enough, what more we're prepared to do about it, but to also ensure that we can answer the detailed questions that members have about where we've got to. So the first thing to say is we've moved the government. That is without question. The second thing to say is we have not moved the government to meet all of our demands. Nobody is under the illusion that what's on the table is what we asked for. It's far short of what we asked for, even though it is a major shift from the government. The question is, do we think that we can move them more? So let's first of all look at what the government have moved to. First thing to say is, despite all of our efforts, the government refuse to concede national pay bargaining, which means that whatever gains we make, they are insisting that we go through individual negotiations with over 200 employers. The government have made it clear that they would rather the dispute carry on and make no concessions than concede that central position of national pay bargaining. So what it means is, although we forced the government to put more money on the table, it is meaningless until every single one of your employers commits to paying it without conditions and gives us what we're asking for in the delegated pay talks. Nevertheless, what the government has delivered is a major shift. So let's just go through with exactly what they've agreed to do. So firstly, they've agreed to allow to be paid a non-consolidated one-off payment of £1,500. Now, the first thing to say about that cost them £750 million. That's not insignificant, and that would not have happened had it not been for our strike action. To be clear, we did not ask and do not want a non-consolidated payment. We wanted a backdated pay award that would be consolidated and pensionable. The government have refused to do that. The non-consolidated payment they put on the table is in line with what they have done to settle other public sector disputes, notably in the health service, and what they have offered to teachers. The £1,500 that we're being offered is more than was offered to teachers. It is less than what is offered to the health service. To give you a comparator, teachers were offered a £1,000 one-off payment. The health service were offered it on a percentage basis that was £1,600 for the lowest paid and was £3,500 for the highest paid. What the government have said to us is they want to make not a percentage award, but a flat rate, which benefits people at the lower end of the pay scale. The government has also now accepted that the pay remit from 2% has to be 4.5% to 5%. That costs them £4.1 billion. It's considerably more than they were going to give us, but it's considerably less than we asked for. We've asked for an inflation matching pay rise. The government claim that that will be more than inflation as the year moves on, and is more than inflation is forecasted to be. But we all know inflation is miles higher than 5% at the moment. Indeed, food inflation is currently 20%. That offer is broadly in line with what has been tabled in other parts of the public sector. The teachers were offered 4.3%. The health service were offered 4.5% to 5%. It is broadly in line for the 23-24 year. And it's clear that the government has shifted to a public sector-wide pay policy that puts this year's pay rises in that 4.5% to 5% bracket. No one thinks that's enough. The question is whether we think we can force them to do more. In addition to that, I think it is important to say that whilst it is far less than we've asked for, the government has conceded that we can't be continually treated worse than everybody else, which is why these figures are broadly comparable to where they are elsewhere. Now, to be clear, that is money that we weren't getting before, but it is nowhere near what we've asked for. And just to give you some idea of what it means, if you are currently on the living wage or the minimum wage, that pay rise at 5% will give people an extra £1,138 on top of the living wage increase. And with a £1,500 non-consolidated payment comes in at £2,638. If you're on £25,000 a year, the 4.5% to 5% will deliver £1,125 consolidated increase, £1,500 non-consolidated. That brings us to £2,625. And if you're on roughly £30,000 a year, the 4.5% to 5% will deliver £1,350. and the £1,500 non-consolidated would take it to 2,850. I give those figures just to give people an idea of what type of money this will generate. Clearly, that's a lot less than the 10% we were seeking backdated. It's a lot more than the government originally intended to give us. In addition to the money, the government has accepted that they cannot make any changes to our redundancy scheme before the next general election. This is an important concession for anyone facing exiting the civil service. It guarantees that the existing redundancy terms must be honoured in all exit packages this side of the general election. And that is a significant concession, given this is a Conservative Party manifesto commitment. If the government is re-elected at the next general election, clearly they will come back and make a further attempt to change the redundancy terms. But it guarantees before an election that cannot be changed, and that is a significant achievement. In terms of job security, all we've managed to push the government to so far is to say that the 2016 redundancy protocols will be honoured, compulsory redundancies will be avoided as much as they can, and they have agreed to further talks to strengthen the redundancy protocols to bring them in line with new ways of working post-pandemic, to include looking at new working patterns, including the opportunity for people to work from home as redundancy avoidance measures. On pay coherence, because it's a frequently asked question, the government has not agreed at this point to make any changes to the structures of civil service pay, and is not prepared at this point to force any of the employers to change anything structural. What they have done is agreed to an urgent talks process around the issue of coherence across different pay rates in different government departments and the problems at the lower end of the pay scale, specifically the problem where AAs and AOs who are now on the national living wage are getting the same rates of pay for different jobs. It has been accepted that is unsustainable. It's been accepted that's not something that can remain in place. But at this point, what we have is a commitment to accelerated talks, but no current solution to that problem agreed centrally. Progress in that they now agreed to talk about it, but nothing concrete at this particular point. And finally, on the question of pensions, to be clear, the government has not agreed to any changes in the current pension position or even to discuss it because it is still a matter of litigation. The union lost its case to the High Court, but has been given leave to appeal that case, and we are now appealing in the courts the ruling with other unions. And our commitment to all members is we remain committed to getting pension contributions reduced and to seek the backdated money for members, but that has not been sorted as where we are now. That is currently still in the courts and remains an ongoing issue. So to summarise, all of those changes have been achieved because of the action we've taken. They all represent real progress, but they do not take us to what we actually asked for. To deal with some of the specific questions that I know arise, because all of this has to now be paid by the individual employers, we have made it clear to the government that we will make no central decision on the future of the national campaign till we've consulted members, which is what we're now using this month to do. And secondly, before we engage with every individual employer to get guarantees that the money will be paid, it will be paid with no strings attached, and it will be paid to all of our members. Our commitment to everyone is that must include every employer who has been part of this dispute, civil service or not. It must ensure it's paid everywhere without any conditions, and it's only when that is satisfied will we even then contemplate moving on to the discussion around 23-24 pay around the 4.5-5%. What I would say, though, is because questions are coming up that are important to answer, is that we have raised centrally with the Cabinet Office in response to queries that we've had, and the answer we have is very clear. The £1,500 cannot have conditions attached related to performance or attendance. In fact, one government department already issued a notice to staff saying the £1,500 would not be paid to anyone who was in any attendance procedures, and we have intervened, and that has now been rectified. So there can be no performance conditions attached. It's a cost of living payment, and it can have no performance conditions. So that's been agreed centrally. Secondly, we want all employers to pay, and we've made it clear that all employers must pay. Thirdly, we're seeking the payment as soon as possible, but only after our reps in every employer are satisfied that the conditions that we have are met. The main ones that have come up that we are dealing with now is anyone who has moved from one job to another in the civil service, we have been assured will get the payment regardless of the qualifying criteria that you had to have been in post on the 30th of March and again on the 1st of June. So if you're one of those members who has moved department, you will be paid. And that has been made clear to us. And that's something we will clarify in every individual employer. Secondly, the question of part-time workers and pro rata payments. We've all seen the government announcement that employers should consider pro-ratering. This has been the single biggest issue raised with us, so I can confirm that we have raised this centrally with the Cabinet Office, and our reps are raising it with every individual employer. Our case is the part-time workers should get the full payment, and indeed we already know that some of the employers have indicated to us that it is their intention to pay that £1,500 part-time and full-time, but others have indicated that their preference is to pro-rata it. We've made the case that this is a one-off payment. People's cost of living crisis is the same, is not any easier if they're part-time workers, and therefore it should be paid, and that we believe there will be major problems if it's not. That is something we're now pursuing with each individual employer, and it will form part of our calculation at the end of the month, whether we think we've made enough progress or not. But I want to assure all part-time workers, wherever you work, if you can take it from us that we're raising on your behalf, but if you have a concern, email your rep. But it is something we are taking up centrally, and we want everyone to get the £1,500 payment. The next question that's come up a lot is people on universal credit and issues around student loan payments. Now, again, to make it clear, we are raising that centrally, and we've also raised it with the employers. I mean, clearly there's limits to what we can do. It's self-evident that any pay rise the union negotiates, including consolidated pay rises that have a backdating element, will raise problems for people on universal credit, because ultimately that's a means-tested benefit. If the union is asking for more money, there is inevitably going to be consequences for those on universal credit. It is not something that has one simple solution. Everyone's circumstances are different. But what we wanted to assure people of is that we have already raised that with employers. We already have some employers who have agreed to stagger the payments. So if that helps people on universal credit, that is something they're prepared to do. We are aware that is not the answer for everyone on universal credit. And so we are seeking to design solutions with the employers where this issue can be dealt with to member satisfaction. My advice on this is if you are in receipt of universal credit, then you need to contact your rep or the union telling us which department you work in so that we can ensure that it can be raised in central negotiations. But Fran, what I want to reassure people of is we are aware of these issues, and we are taking those issues up. So finally, what I wanted to move to, Fran, is that I hope what people can see is that where there are common problems coming up, we're raising them. Ultimately, the judgment on whether the £1,500 is paid and whether it's paid in an acceptable way will be made in a month's time, only when we reviewed what's happened in every single employer. But we can confirm that we are now approaching every employer for talks to get this payment paid and to ensure that everybody gets it without conditions. And recognizing that people want a consolidated payment, what we're saying is we've also been made very clear to us by members that if there is money to be had, people do want it ASAP in order to alleviate the cost of living crisis that they're in. And one of the things that we made clear right from the start of the campaign is that the only conceivable settlement would be if money was paid now and members got money in their pockets. Now, it is clear that we can get money now and it will be extra, albeit it will not be the consolidated increase that we want. And to get that, we will need to fight on, reject where we are, and be prepared to take more action. So, Fran, what I wanted to finish on is the questions, apart from detailed questions that people may have, to where does this leave us as a union? And obviously, there are three things, while we now engage with all the employers, that we're asking every member and rep to consider. And the union has put in place a mechanism where we've asked every branch to hold members' meetings, where we know some of our groups are arranging big online meetings for members. We've set up an email facility where members can tell us their views centrally. And essentially what we're asking is all parts of the union, from individual members to branches and groups, to ask themselves three questions moving forward about the next stage. And this is key, because what we decide next must be based on what the majority of people believe the union should do at this point. And there are three questions that we're really asking people to address. The first one is to accept that we have made progress that has only happened because of the strike action we've taken. None of this would have happened to us had we not taken the stance that we've taken. And we want people to take that on board, because whether we fight on now or whether we take what we've got and prepare in the future with the lesson learned that strike action actually delivered, I think it is important to accept that we've won something through national strike action for the first time in decades. And it's the first time that the union has ever tried a strike strategy that has not been about single one-day strikes, but has been about building concerted, targeted action. I hope we can all agree that has worked to deliver concessions of the government that we wouldn't have had. The second question, though, is have we got enough to consider balloting members to end the national dispute? And the point there, as I've said all along, is nobody believes we have met the claim. The question is, have we made enough progress at this point? And that is inextricably linked to the third question that we want everyone to address, is if we don't feel it is enough, then we have to commit to taking further industrial action, because that is the only way that we will now force the government to put more on the table. The NEC is very clear that it is prepared to lead further industrial action if we believe that can be delivered. But what we have to accept is there are now less unions in dispute than at any other point since we started. Not all unions have settled. The education unions are still trying to get more money. And we know that in the health service, junior doctors and the Royal College of Nurses are still fighting on. But there are now less unions fighting than there has ever been since we started the campaign. And the signs are the Prospect and the FDA are consulting their members, also asking them a question of whether they've got enough. Now, other unions being involved is not the only factor, but we should know that if we fight on, it will be with less unions than before, but we can do that. So the real question is, can we take more action than we've taken to get these concessions? Can we deliver more all members unpaid action? And can we deliver more targeted action? And all we want people to give us an honest answer to that question, Fran, is if we can, and if that means we can win the reballot in DWP with this money on the table, if it means we can win the ballot we have to have in HMRC and in other areas within the next 6 to 8 weeks, and if people are confident that we can do that and take more strike action, people should tell us that. The union would want to fight for more if we feel getting more is deliverable. But what we don't want to do is to say this is not acceptable in the belief that we can take more action to find that that is not the case. Because what that will do is weaken the union, and it won't allow us to take full advantage of how far we've got to build for the confidence of the future. And that really is the question that we now need to answer. One, get the detail right to make sure every member is clear we're trying to get all members the money, and that we will not even contemplate moving on until that's guaranteed. But then secondly, do we bank what we've got now, get into the talks about the lower pay scales, coherence and job security, and take stock at the end of the year in advance of next year, being able to be confident that strikes delivered extra this year, so there's no reason why that can't happen again next year? Or do people believe it is not enough because it's not consolidated, because the money is taxable, the £1,500 is taxable, because people believe it's nowhere near enough? That is a legitimate point for people to say, and the NEC would take that on board, but it can only be taken forward if we commit to significant more amounts of industrial action. And part of that, Fran, is just being honest and recognising that undoubtedly means more unpaid national action, but it would also mean more targeted action, which would raise the question of the levy continuing, and potentially the union needing to consider whether that levy needed to be increased to have more targeted action than the £6 million worth that we've already had. And I just want to give people this absolute assurance in finishing. The NEC is here to lead the union and represent members. There should be no doubt that when we make our decision in a month's time, we will listen to the views that come in, and people should be in no doubt that we are prepared to fight on if people believe we can deliver in the way that I'm suggesting. But people should also be in no doubt either that the NEC recognises that the big concessions we've forced, though not everything we asked for, happened because of the strikes. And if we now decide that that tells us the strikes have delivered, prioritise getting the money, getting into the delegated talks, then we are absolutely believe that that is a sensible and just thing to also do if that's the view that people come to, because that puts us in a great position in the future to build on this and get more. And as part of that, Fran, I'll leave this final thought. We know that the 1,500 is the 1,500. We know that the pay remit is 4.5% to 5%. But I also want to be clear that in discussions we've already had with some key employers, it is clear that there will be more than 5% offered to people at the bottom end of the pay scale. And therefore, people should not just think it'll be 4.5%, 5% and 1,500. There is the opportunity significantly to get more than that for some of our lowest paid as part of the dealing with the crisis in low pay. So I've been through that in some detail, Fran. I hope that people can see that the NEC want genuinely to get views. We want to thank people for doing everything they've done. We've only got this far because of the strikes. It is a significant achievement to get this far. Now the question is it enough, or can we deliver significantly more strike action over the rest of the year?
Okay, thanks very much, Mark, and thanks for taking us through all of that. And I think hopefully what people can get from that is it's quite a nuanced position, isn't it? So the government have made headline announcements about the figures, but they are wedded to delegations. So clearly, you know, in delegated pay bargaining, a lot of the detail will come out. Our overarching position is nobody left behind. So when we say that that money is for everybody, we want to make sure that in delegated talks, we get those commitments. And this is where you come in, because clearly you need to feed your views in and you need to be informed of what your delegated pay negotiators are telling you as well. So there's a whole range of issues and questions that come from that. And I think, you know, it's been really helpful to get that overview of where we are, where we're going, what's been achieved so far, but then to put that into the context of what happens next. And if we think we can fight on and deliver more, you know, against the backdrop of that money being available, then people need to be honest and say that. So as I say, whole host of questions and comments. What I'm going to try and do as best I can is lump them together where they're very similar. So if I don't read your name out, it's not because your question's been ignored. It's quite often because there are a number of questions that are incredibly similar. And what we'll try and do is get through as many of those as we can in the time we've got. So the first question, actually, I think Mark has probably covered in everything he said, but it might be worth just reiterating the main points, Mark. How do delegated pay talks with employers work? Are they obliged to make a no strings offer? So, you know, having been told these are the headlines by the Cabinet Office, are they obliged to honour those? And I know you've covered that in some detail, but is there anything you want to say just on that simple point?
So the answer to that question is since Margaret Thatcher's government, she removed national bargaining, where we would have one set of negotiations with the Treasury on behalf of everyone, and everyone got the same. And she broke it up into hundreds of different delegated pay bargaining to weaken the strength of the union and to allow for different rates of pay in different areas. We are committed to trying to get back to national pay bargaining. We're trying to find legal cases to win equal pay cases and to put pressure on. And we're raising it constantly, both with opposition parties. So we want to get back to the old system. But where we currently are now is the government issues a remit, which is its cost control mechanism, telling departments what they cannot pay more for them. But it then leaves the negotiations up to each individual department. And that is why things look so differently. So they're not obliged to do anything. They need to get into discussions with us. But what we've got here is a very clear steer that the government is telling them that they are letting them pay the 1,500. And what is happening behind doors is it's clear that they're all being told they should be paying that. On the delegated pay talks, they will vary from employer by employer, but clearly we're trying to maximise the amount of money from our members. And what we as a union do, Fran, just to reassure people, is we don't just sit back and say, well, whatever happens, good luck. We keep a track on all the separate pay talks. We issue advice to our negotiators, try and get best practice and try to ensure the best possible outcomes across the board. So I hope that gives people a little bit of a flavour. But to be clear, if you're in an employer and they've said to the union, we're not paying the money, then that is not acceptable and we won't let that stand. And indeed, there is no way that we would even contemplate ending this campaign until we know everybody has paid the money without condition.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. I mean, there's a question here from Lee Barr and from the HMRC, but actually it's a question that could apply in any one of the delegated areas. When will staff become aware of what percentage of pay increase would pay to each grade, as the pay remit allows departments to pay an average of 4.5 to 5%, but is not specific about how this might be applied across the grades? Or in other words, in what month's pay statement we like to see that increase? And I mean, you know, sure Mark will have something to say on this, but that question is going to come up in every delegated area, and that's where we are now. Having the Cabinet Office having told departments to go and consult the relevant PCS pay negotiators, or in pretty much every major department that we know of, and certainly including the HMRC, that's happening now. And those discussions are taking place about what percentage goes to what grade, and how quickly that can be paid. I mean, the overarching message is that the £1,500 is a recognition for the cost of living crisis and needs to be paid as quickly as possible. The 4.5 to 5% that's for this year may take a little longer to negotiate. I don't know if there's anything, because I mean, actually there's quite a few questions we could cover off with this about people asking when they'll get the £1,500. And I think, you know, a very broad brush answer is that the £1,500 is to be paid as soon as possible. The other stuff may take a bit longer. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Mark.
Well, just to add that we've insisted that the employers must talk to the union, because we already saw from some of the early announcements that some of them said they'd pay the money, but not if you were having any attendance issues. So we want to try to get to the balance of the sooner people get it, the sooner it's in your bank account, and the sooner you can benefit from it. But we do not want strings attaching. We want it to be paid to everybody. So there's a balance, but we're pushing for it to be done as early as we can. Already there's an indication from a major employer today that they're trying to pay it in July, for example. And so, you know, we want that doing as soon as possible. Just to remind people, though, on the delegated talks about the 4.5%, 5%, the union has refused to go to those talks during the national campaign, because we've recognised that our enemy or our opponent is the government, and the government need to give the employers the freedom to do more. And so, for example, had we gone to the delegated talks before now, we wouldn't have had any cost of living payment for 2022-23, because departments weren't allowed to do it. So our boycott of those talks in the campaign has forced this concession. So we've now asked our negotiators to go into the employers, secure the £1,500 first without conditions, and only then go on to the talks about this year's remit. If those talks proceed to our satisfaction and deliver the maximum amount of money to the lower paid, then we would hope that that's a speedy process, that people can start getting the answer to Lee's question, which is how much per grade. But what we don't want to do is have speedy talks that wind things up that is not satisfactory. So what we're also trying to balance here is consulting everybody during this month to get a feel for where we're heading next. And obviously, if the feel is we want to have more strike action, then we wouldn't really want to be rushing negotiations, because that's a sort of diametrically opposite place to be. If the feel is we've taken as much action as we likely in this particular point, then obviously we do want to get on and get money in people's pockets and maximize it. So that's a flavor, but we would certainly be updating members right throughout the summer, not just on the £1,500, which we will say something about within weeks, but on those early delegated exchanges, so that people are very clear as to where we are.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Quick question from Sarah, which I can probably cover off. If she was in one department on the 31st of March, which was HMRC, and then moved to another government department on the 1st of July, will she still receive the £1,500 cost living payment, please? And Sarah and Mark might want to elaborate, but both the HMRC and the MOD are part of all of this. So, you know, regardless of who you are working for at the qualifying date, those are both employers that are committed to paying that. So I think that covers that, Mark, does it not?
Yeah, the only thing to add there, Fran, is obviously there was no agreement with the union about these dates of the 30th of March and the June date.
Yeah.
And obviously that's raised a concern. The first one, we are clear that if people remain but have just moved departments, they will get the money. And it's probably the importing department that will have to pay, but it will definitely be paid. That raises a question about people who were in the union and in the civil service and related employers up until March and then have left.
Yeah.
Because if it is a payment in recognition of 2022, 2023, that raises a question why those people don't get it. We have raised that centrally, and that's been taken away. And that is something, again, that we are trying to see what progress we can make. Clearly, that's not going to affect loads of people, but the ones it does affect will feel strongly about it. So we've registered as a point, we've taken it up, and it'll be one of the things that we'll give more information on when there's anything to report.
Thanks, Mark. And that actually covers June Moffat's point. June's just pointed out that there are people who've made redundant from the 1st of June and appear to therefore being cut out of the cost of living payment. And that's the answer on that. We're trying to get more commitments on that, but at the moment they've taken all of that away. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay, so Anonymous asks, when will members get their say on this offer? Will there be a ballot? And I know you've covered that in what you've said, but I don't know if you just want to reiterate the key points there.
Yeah, so there will definitely be a ballot of members at some point. We are committed to the 5 members who voted for the strikes and for the campaign. It should be members who make the final decision in a ballot. The question is what that ballot is on and what form it takes, which is why we're in this consultation period where now we're trying to gauge what people think. And that will determine, obviously, that the ballot question. But I have seen it suggested that the NEC might want to end the campaign without giving members a vote. Just to be absolutely clear, there will be a ballot of all members when we can see how this develops over the next month. What's really important in helping us shape that debate about what that ballot looks like is people using this month to feed in their views. And I just want to stress, Fran, here that understanding people's concerns is important, but we should also be clear about we need to do more if we want to improve it. And the thing that I just want to stress is we recently had our conference, and some people argued we should have more unpaid action. Some people said members couldn't afford the unpaid action and only wanted targeted action. And therefore, what we shouldn't make the mistake of doing is wishing the world to be like we'd like it to be. And it's all well and good, some reps telling us we should have lots more action. That's fine if we can deliver it. And I think that's where we need a degree of real honesty here, is if it's not good enough, how much action are we prepared to take? There's not many unions who've paid full pay for targeted action in the way that we have. I've mentioned that's cost £6 million so far. Half of it paid through the levy, half of it paid through the union centrally. If we are going to continue that strategy at the same pace or more, we clearly need to raise significant more money to do that. If the view is, well, actually, let's do less of that and more all member action, again, what we need to understand is the issues of the cost of living crisis here. And I think, let's be clear, I know that you as president, me as general secretary, nothing would make us happier than to believe that we absolutely could deliver more action to get more out of the government. If we can, then of course we should. But we shouldn't have wishful thinking. I've seen some of the comments already about, people, I've seen some people saying we should have more strikes who actually haven't been on strike at all yet because they're in departments that didn't get over the threshold. Mm. And, this is not about individual views. It's about us as a union collectively believing we can deliver it. And if we have doubts about that, we should bank the gains we've made, get into the talks and get ready to do it again next year if we have to. And if the government makes another derisory offer. But if you genuinely believe you can deliver, then tell us that. And I think that's the grown-up debate that we want. And, we can be clear what the NEC needs to understand is where people's view is. So people should be honest, and we will make sure that we reflect the views that we come back in on.
Okay. I mean, Declan from DWP, his point has been covered already in as much as staff due to retire in the next few weeks, will they receive the lump sum? Is there a cut-off date? Again, we're trying to get absolute clarity on that, but our position is that everybody should receive that without exception, but we'll get that clarified, and Declan certainly in the DWP we'll make sure that we get a very clear answer on that, because we know that there are people that have taken redundancy or left. Okay, both Lee Edwards and Matt Wall asked the $1 million question. Mark, do you honestly think we will get more if we reject this offer? Mark, do you think it's viable to achieve a better outcome than the existing 4.5% plus 0.5% for those on lower pay? So, I mean, that's what this is all about, really, isn't it? But I don't know if there's anything you want to say on that specifically.
Well, it is the $1 million question, and my answer to that is these are the things that I think we have to weigh up. Right? So there's less unions on strike now than there were. There's no doubt that the action we've taken has benefited by being out with other unions, many of whom have settled for something similar to this. So there'll be less of us. Does that mean we can't win? No, it means we can win on our own if we can deliver the levels of action that are actually required. If we look at our ballot results, if we look at the DWP ballot result as one case in point, the DWP got over the threshold in the first ballot, narrowly failed in the second, and we have to reballot in the DWP. So we know that it's hard to get the 50%. The question we have to ask ourselves is it easier to get 50% with the £1,500 being paid because people will think we've got that, let's get more, or does it make it harder? So these are material questions that we have to ask ourselves, and we can't do wishful thinking. If you want my honest opinion, where we are now, Fran, is that we would have to, I think, be pretty clear. We can win the reballot in DWP. We can win the reballot in HMRC in the next 8 weeks. And we can deliver more action than we've taken up to now, which is 3 national strikes and 318 separate targeted strike action. That is a big ask. So if we can deliver that, I think we could squeeze more out of them. But I think that is a big if. And what I want to really address here, because I think the question is an honest one, is if we come to the conclusion that we've forced them to do more than they've ever done before, not all we wanted. But of course, what the union at that point has achieved is achieved £4.9 billion worth of money from the government into members' packets because of strikes. When others were doing it, when we come to next year, if next year's offer is rubbish, and if we haven't made progress on the minimum wage and the grading issues, then I'm pretty sure that the union's executive will want to say, well, we won something last year, we can do it again. And in the interim period, we build up our war chest, we get more money in the strike fund, we bank what we've got and we fight on. And there's a lot to be said for that. Yeah. The argument, and I just want to be clear about why some people might say, well, why don't we just take what they're offering us and fight on, is that, what we can't have is a never-ending dispute that fizzles out because we don't deliver the action that we want to. So my belief is that I would want to see compelling evidence from members and reps that they don't just think they want more, that they believe we can deliver more. And if people tell us that that's doable, then clearly we can win more if we deliver more action. But it would need to be more than we've delivered to this point. So that's just an honest answer. I think people can read between the lines and hear what I'm saying there is if you branch believes your members will fight on more and take more action, tell us. And if that's the view across the union, undoubtedly that's what we should do. But if you have doubts about that, it would be daft to reject this out of hand, knowing that we can't possibly force them to get more. And I think that weakens the union. And that's the real honest debate that we want to have. And I come back to the point that it's what members really say here that matters, and our reps, because, I don't want to keep making this point, but if we keep being told we can get more from areas that haven't had any strike action at all yet because they could not get over the threshold, that must tell people something. It must tell them that they've got a lot of work to do in their area before they can start telling everybody else to take more strikes, So let's just be honest and grown up about it. If we cannot deliver, we should definitely take what's on offer, bank it, and go for more next year. If you feel we can deliver, tell us. And the NEC, I've got no doubt, will be prepared to lead a fight on if it believed that we could do that.
Okay, thank you. Quite an important question from Kerry White. Whitehill, who says, I work for the Crown Office Procurator Fiscal in Scotland. I received an email from the Union State saying that the offer doesn't apply to me, but assurances have been given here that all departments will receive the £1,500. Quite confusing. And obviously one of the issues around delegation. So I don't know if you want to just cover that off briefly.
Yeah, I mean, just to apologise, there was a miscommunication went out from PCS where an email that was meant for people not in the devolved administrations inadvertently went everywhere. And obviously people in the devolved administrations in Scotland have already had a separate pay offer and voted to accept it. And they therefore were not meant to be covered by what the Westminster government was doing in areas where the pay remit applies. Now, that's the situation in Scotland. In Wales, we hadn't made the breakthrough that we had made in Scotland. And I can confirm to people in Wales that on the back of what the Westminster government has said, we have now approached the Welsh government to insist that they at least match what is happening and pay people, because they haven't done what has happened in Scotland. So the broad principle is, if you're in a devolved settlement and you've already agreed to pay settlement, this 1,500 does not apply. If you are not under a devolved pay, it will apply. And if you've got any doubts about your individual circumstances, contact either your rep or your full-time officer and we'll confirm that for you.
Okay, thank you. Quick question from Rachel Butler. UK SBS are considering whether to pay the £1,500. Don't they have to? Short answer, yes. And that's what we'll certainly be pushing for, Rachel, to get a clear commitment on that. Matthew Bennett says, does accepting the £1,500 prevent there being any departmental pay awards above the Cabinet Office remit this year at least? So if we accept the 1,500, are we also, I think, taking into account what Mark's already said to you about how some, whilst 4.5 to 5% is the remit, we're already clear that at some grades the awards will be higher than that. But Mark, I don't know if you want to just answer that briefly.
Well, only to this extent. We want everyone to get the 1,500 because to say, obviously it would be daft to tell them to keep the money in their coffers. So we want to get the 1,500 out there as soon as we can, because that'll be money in members' bank accounts. We then want to get into the delegated discussions because it is important that we see what that produces. But obviously the question is right to point out that there is an overall limit of average 4.5%, 5%. So what that will mean is if you get more for the lower paid, significantly more, then clearly the implication of that is it has to be funded by potentially less for the higher grades. So there's going to be an important discussion. But if what we got back this month was that everyone was telling us, do you know what, this is nowhere near cutting it, fight on, then to be honest, we would not want to get into detailed delegated pay discussions if we were fighting on to force the government to have a bigger pay remit, because it's a bit counterproductive. So a lot of this rests on whether we feel that what we've got is enough progress for now. Let's get the money in people's pockets and get the pay discussions around each delegated area so members can have a look at what that actually means. And I think that's the big picture decision, Fran, that we want to make. And you know, and I'm looking at the comments that are coming in, and I can see that people are grasping this issue. It's not what we wish for, it's what we genuinely think we can get, and I think that's the key discussion for us to have. And it's very important to stress that UK SBS question is that if an employer says we ain't paying the money, I can tell you now that there is no question at the NEC in a month's time would say we want a ballot on ending the dispute. We are absolutely clear that everyone must pay the money, and that includes museums and galleries and arm's length bodies. It's everybody who's in the dispute. We need the money paying, and I think it's important to stress that. And that's the guidance gone out to negotiators.
Okay, look, there are a number of questions that we won't get to in the time. There's a couple of announcements or a couple of points to cover off. Can I let people know that for DVSA members, there's a DVSA all members meeting at 6:30 tomorrow night. Please try and join that if you can. Stuart Shaw asks, didn't the fire service sue the government over the overpayment on their pensions and win? And did they get their money back? That's part of the legal action that we're part of. But Mark, I don't know if you want to comment on the pension stuff very quickly.
Yes, it is an important point. So what the Fire Brigades Union won was a legal case that said the pension changes were discriminatory on age grounds. And because of that, what the government then had to do was make sure that they removed the discrimination. And because that's cost them a shed load of money, that's why we're overpaying, because they're making us pay the cost of putting right their illegality. And so the question on the level of contributions has not been won in court. The discriminatory nature of the changes was won in court. The government, being the government, therefore did that disgraceful thing where they say, well, okay, we'll put it right then, but you're going to pay. And that's what we're legally challenging. So far, that's had one hearing in the High Court where we lost the case, but we've been given leave to appeal. And our legal advisors believe we have a very, very strong case. And that's why we're continuing to fight it in court. Just to say, if we win that court case, we will demand that the civil service cuts the contributions and gives everybody the money back from April 2019. That's an average of £2,000 per member. If we lose the court case and there's nowhere legally to fight, we will obviously then need to consider where we go next to try and keep pressing that point through campaigning.
Okay, thank you. Just because we're running out of time, there are lots of comments suggesting that this is the first offer. Can we just remind ourselves that the first offer was 2%, and it's the fact that we've moved them from 2.2% to 4.5% that we're now discussing. So any idea that the 4.5% was a starting point is just incorrect. So it's probably worth covering that off quickly. Okay, it is 19:59. I'm going to invite you, Mark, if there's anything you want to say in closing, recognising that we've got through a lot of questions. A lot of questions have been covered by other questions, but there are still issues that we didn't get to tonight, and no doubt we may want to think about doing further consultations. So, Mark, anything you want to say in closing?
Well, first, thanks to everyone who's attended. We've had loads of comments, and we really appreciate them. And as I hope people can see, every time a question is raised, we go away and we try and do something about it. So the single biggest thing that is still worrying people I can see is part-time workers and pro rata.
Yeah.
So what I want to be absolutely clear to all our part-time members, we believe that you should get the £1,500. And that is a case that we have made centrally and we are making to every individual employer. We already have got some employers to commit to paying £1,500 to part-time workers. So that's already been done. What we have not got is a commitment that everyone's going to do that yet. And that's the discussion that we're in. But let's be clear, if at the end of the month, loads of employers say we're giving part-timers pro rata, we are not leaving that go. That is something that we are determined to try and get to a better position. So I want part-time workers to know that we are making this argument for you, and we've already won it in some areas, and we're determined to try and win it everywhere. So that's, I think, very important to say. Also, I think we've cleared the reassurance for people who've moved between departments, they're going to get it. Just really to finish, Fran, I just want to acknowledge we did not want a non-consolidated payment. We wanted 10% backdated. We've not got it. We have got to what was broadly offered to others. That in itself is an achievement because we've never been in that place before. All of that has happened because of our action. What we now want to do, and I think this is where I would leave it, is we want to get money in people's pay packets as soon as we can. We want to get into the delegated talks in order to maximize the amount of money that we get for 23, 2024. But we absolutely want to judge the next step based on understanding what people think. And I will therefore just finish by just making it clear. This next month is not about ending anything. It's about making every employer pay the money. It is about testing the mood. And it is about working out where we go forward. And the assurance I know I can give on your behalf, Fran, and the NEC's behalf, is that we lead a democratic union. At some point, there'll be a ballot of members, because only members should decide finally where we go. but the nature of that ballot must be based on a genuine assessment of where we are. Now, I've looked at the comments coming in tonight, and what we're really urging you to do is go back to them 3 questions. Have we got concessions? Yes, we have, only because of the strike. Is it enough? That can only ultimately, I think, be decided if you believe that we can deliver more industrial action and force them to get more. The thing to bear in mind with that is that's not wishful thinking. We need to be pretty sure that we know what we can deliver. And just bear in mind that because the government's got 11 unions in the health service to settle, because it made an offer to the teachers, then withdrew the £1,000 and they're now going into the pay review body, where we are at, it is very important that we judge this next stage right, because there's a lot at stake. What we don't want here is a weaker union, anything fizzling out or anything end up with rancor or disunity. We want to make a united decision. We forced them to move 2 or 3 times in truth. No one's mentioned tonight the redundancy scheme and everything else. We have made progress. Now, in a member-led union, we decide the simplest of all questions. Do we believe we can take lots more action to force them? If you believe that, tell us. If in your heart of hearts you don't believe that, then we should recognise that we've made progress, get the money to members as soon as we can, get into the talks that they promised us on an accelerated basis, and take stock before 2024 to ensure that they don't make derisory offer next year and we deal with these systemic problems around pay coherence and low pay. So that's what we want to hear from people from. And when the NEC does meet, we'll make sure we communicate. We'll have further events like this, and ultimately members will decide it in a ballot at some point, Fran. So I hope people have got quite a bit out of it and can see where we are. But let's finish on a good note. Isn't it nice that we can even have this conversation? Every other Facebook Live we've generally had in the past on national issues, it is about gearing up and campaigning, and the government always saying no. It's as we predicted would happen. You have forced them to make concessions, and it's great that we're in a position and we can even have this debate. That's a first for the union, and everybody should congratulate themselves, because that's only happened because of the brilliant united stand we've all taken.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I think that's a really good note to finish on. Just to let people in DSG know that you've got a meeting at 6 o'clock tomorrow, so make sure you tune into that. So clearly lots and lots of consultation happening all over PCS. If your branch are organising members' meetings, which most branches are, try and be a part of those, try and get involved in the discussion, raise any questions that haven't been picked up tonight. Make sure you feed any views into us, as Mark said. The next couple of weeks or few weeks is very much about the maximum consultation possible, the maximum number of people feeding in their views. It's legitimate to have views, whether that's that we can deliver more or that we can't, but if we are talking about delivering more, we need to consider how that would be done. So I coming from the DWP, ability to reballot on that basis. So with all of that to contend with, I'm going to close for this evening. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thanks for tuning in. Keep in touch. Send us any views you've got, and we will make sure that everything is fed into the National Executive Committee that makes the decision. Thanks to Richard, our interpreter. Thanks to Mark for fielding a million questions. And thanks to you all for joining. Take care and speak to you all very soon. Good night.
Thank you.